There was a debate on November 30th, which was before the Twitter files dropped, right? So that's where we're going to start the program this evening. We're going to play some audio from the Munk debate featuring Matt Taibbi and Douglas Murray versus Michelle Goldberg and Malcolm Gladwell. And this was not on the issue of free speech per se, but it was on the issue of whether or not you ought to, meaning one, right, ought to trust the mainstream media. Taibbi and Murray argued no, and Goldberg and Malcolm argued that you should. I'm going to play the segment here where the Hunter Biden laptop comes up. And so let me just play the sound here. It'll be pretty clear to most who is speaking, but I will make a point to clarify that as we go.
Hunter Biden's story.
Oh, here we go. I'm sorry.
Of course you don't want to hear it.
Is there no end to the...
Okay, so that's Malcolm Gladwell. So, oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Oh, yawn. Hunter Biden.
He was really throughout. Michelle Goldberg, I felt more like she just lives in a bubble. I felt like she was an honest actor living in a bubble. Like the way that she processed, I don't know if you have that clip or if you selected it, the way that she processed the meaning of the DNC leak and automatically assumed that that was something people should have been protected from.
Wow, I was right on that. Yeah, that's coming up in this.
But that struck me as honest ignorance. Whereas this guy.
Take the Hunter Biden story.
Oh, here we go. I'm sorry.
Of course you don't want to hear it.
Is there no end to the kind of Twitter stuff you guys are going to dredge up?
Of course you don't want to hear it, Malcolm. Of course you wouldn't, because it goes against your ideological presumptions.
In 2016.
Now here's Michelle Goldberg talking about the 2016 DNC leaks. This is what Russell was talking about. And yeah, I thought this was a pretty fascinating thing that she says here.
In 2016, I was at the Democratic convention, and you sort of saw how it turned the mood, how it soured the mood, how it angered so many of the Bernie Sanders supporters. So it had a real impact on the way that race unfolded. And I think that in retrospect, a lot of media came to see that how that material was obtained and how it was kind of strategically disseminated was as important of a story as the contents of those emails, and that they had made a mistake by only focusing on the latter. And so they didn't want to make the same mistake again with the Hunter Biden laptop. And you were arguing, it seems to me, that they should have.
Yeah. Okay, let's just pause it right there. That's just pretty astounding that she says that. And this, again, just shows the bubble she's in.
That's the bubble
that she's lying,
that's what I'm saying. I felt like the other one was just a little fucking weasel.
Oh, yeah, he's just an asshole. Right.
He's an asshole. With her, you felt like she was an honest actor with some really dumb opinions that actually illustrated how bad the media is. Maybe that's why they won a historic victory. There has never been this much of a point swing in the history of these debates, because it began pretty even, 48-52. And at the end, what was it, 67-33?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the debate, 48% of the audience said we should trust the mainstream media. 52 said we shouldn't. By the end, 67% said no, we shouldn't trust the mainstream media, and only 33% did. So by the end of the night, the audience actually reflected the actual polling of the people, meaning regular people who don't go to Munk debates, right? I mean, this attracts a certain crowd, right? Just by the nature of what it is, right? But yeah, it was the largest point swing since they've been doing these.
Right.
And
that's a heartwarming Christmas miracle.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, they crushed it.
Yeah. I mean, at the end, the audience saw through that bullshit.
Right.
They didn't buy the race card. They didn't buy all this crap. They didn't buy her argument here. Like, they live in that little bubble where what they're saying makes sense. And that's why that's why Malcolm, as Murray later refers to him, that's why Malk kept falling back on these tropes of his class. oh, well, in the days that you admire of newspapers, this was really funny when he goes, well, a lot of people weren't paid attention to, and he continues from predictable race observations, but then he goes on to say, well, they didn't pay attention to the poor. Oh yeah, man, they are all over that now.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, no.
The news business has really tuned into those working class issues, haven't they? We can see that, especially coming out of a week where they in lockstep threw these railroad union workers under the bus, like universally. It took the party line on it, took the administration line on. Well, we can't have this right before. Oh, yeah, you're really focused on the poor. Actually, as Taibbi often points out in his writing, most big newspapers back then had a working class reporter. That would be their beat, who would write in a certain style. It would be a Studs Terkel in Chicago. In New York, that was Jimmy Breslin. Wrote in that voice. You'd have a guy who wrote in this very, worldly kind of, yeah, and the guys down at the docks have this to say. Like it was a convention of newspapers, and now that does not exist. I can't even think of a reporter who works that angle at any newspaper that I can think of.
Well, you're right. I mean, Taibbi has spoken about this. He comes from a news family. He mentions in this debate almost all of his family growing up were in the news business.
Right.
And he talked about his father always told him the story is the boss. I believe that was the line.
Yep.
Right. That in like his opening statement, he references the story is the boss. Our role as journalists, our role as reporters is to get the story. And then we give that story to the people, and what the people do with that story is up to them. And the really fascinating thing about what Goldberg just said there is that flies directly in the face of what Taibbi already made a point to combat.
Right.
She's saying, yes, those DNC emails were true, and yes, they were newsworthy, but look how it ruined the mood at the convention.
Right.
Oh,
the mood.
Yeah,
the mood.
Said, it ruined the vibe at the DNC.
She's proving his point. You're a fucking
Exactly.
reporter. What
Exactly.
do you care about you're literally talking about the emotional impact.
Taibbi's whole point in his opening statement, he says, the impact is not our number one concern.
Right,
the story
right.
is the number one concern. Our job is to tell the story. And then she comes back here, well, you leaked these emails, and that happened right before the DNC, and the Bernie supporters were very upset about that, and you could tell I was there. It ruined the whole vibe. Like,
Yo, man.
Are you kidding?
Those DNC emails really, they were a bummer, man. They brought
so we have to
everybody
be careful
down.
not to make that mistake again. We can't make the mistake of ruining the Democrats' vibe again.
Right. And look, the happy ending here is that the audience saw through it. They saw through it because they didn't have their captive audience that they have for their grape drink version of news.
News organizations are not required to report on anything. No one has to do the story on the Hunter Biden laptop if they don't want to. They're not obligated to. However, they went beyond not covering it. They wrote stories that this was Russian disinformation. They repeated the statements made by 50 former intelligence officials who described this as having all the earmarks of a Russian information campaign. By the way, they didn't use the word disinformation. But that wasn't even the most important part of the story. The important part of that story wasn't even about Hunter Biden. It was about the decision by Facebook and Twitter at the behest, at least in the case of Facebook, of the U.S. government to quash or dial down that story and deny access to that story. That is a historic moment in the history of censorship in our country.
And
now Murray hits even harder.
I've got to add to that. It's like, Malcolm, you're kind of, oh my God, what a yawnaroo the whole Hunter Biden story is. How boring to talk about the idea of corruption at an epic scale in the first family. How boring. Who would want to harp on about that? Let me try the counterfactual on you. It's October 2020. and a huge number of emails are suddenly dumped, revealing unbelievable scandal in the Trump family. I don't want to concentrate on the dick pics and the crack and the stuff. Never mind about Don Jr. if he'd been doing that. Let's just focus on the emails. There was a very easy way, Michelle, as you know, to certify whether this stuff was true. You could call up anyone on the email chains and say, did you get this email? They didn't bother with any of that stuff. They'd have been excited as hell across most of the mainstream media if this had been emails from Donald Trump's son saying, and I'm no Trump fan, let's not get into that cheap rut. But if it had been Don Jr. saying to his child, you've no idea what I've done for this family, the demeaning things I've gone through, I have to give half of everything I earn to my dad. Oh, you're Nauru, definitely. Who'd care about that? No, the point is simply that this was one of the occasions in recent years where the mainstream media showed its transparency as a political organization. That's why we care.
Okay.
Exactly. And that got a big applause, and it was well deserved. That's the point. The point is it acts as a political organization now, which is what it is now.
Right. Which was something that predictably they kept trying to squirm out of the way. Oh, well, the media makes mistakes, but there's no pattern here. There's no conspiracy here. And then he does this whole straw man, which Murray kept calling him out on at the end, where Munk does this entire straw man of, and this is where they always go. Oh, so you think that all the media get together in a room and decide how they're going to cover stories? And this was another place where I wish Taibbi had been more bold, because that is something Murray dominated this. And look, he's very compelling and he argues very well. And I'm sure it's part of why the numbers swung so heavily, because he is a great speaker. He's a great presence. And Taibbi's a more laid back, writer. He's a more, quiet guy. But he has addressed that question extensively and said, no, of course it's not that everybody gets together in a room. But very quickly, when you're working in a newsroom, you can see who gets promoted and who doesn't. You can see who moves up and who gets the plum assignments and who doesn't. So it becomes very clear to you very quickly where the incentives are. So the incentive structure favors a certain groupthink that is pro-establishment. I really wished he had been bolder, because he could have answered a lot of this, and he has extensively.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite quotes about this, and you can apply it to this conversation, you could apply it to several. When George Carlin was on I think it was one of the Bill Maher 90s panels, the politically incorrect show, he started talking, he started making similar points to, what Murray and Taibbi were making in this context. I forget what the context was back then. And one of the right-wing hosts at the time called him a conspiracy theorist, as if there's a conspiracy, right? As if all these news people get together and they,
Right. And that's not what anyone's saying. That's not what any reasonable person is suggesting.
Well, what George Carlin, he crystallized it so well. He says, you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests collide. Right? When a bunch of people have the same interests and they all have the same idea of how they are going to fulfill those interests, they know how to act. You don't have to call a meeting. There is not a regular club. They don't need a memo. They get it. We advance by acting a certain way, by undertaking a certain mindset and promoting a certain worldview. And so there doesn't need to be this formal conspiracy. There doesn't have to be a cabal of anything.
Please clap.